What's going on, everybody? Noah with Madison Angling, and as you can probably guess, today's video is not a fishing video. Instead, I'm going to show you guys how to replace the steering box on your Minn Kota TERROVA. And unfortunately, my steering box has finally gone out on it. This thing has been used and abused. It's not looking so great. Ew, that's not great. So we're gonna fix that. I'm gonna show you how easy it is. There are almost no videos out there explaining how to do this. Saltwater guys, if you're watching this, riptide should be very similar to this, but this is something you probably encounter more in a corrosive environment than you do in freshwater. But for the few of us that do have this issue, I'm gonna show you guys how to replace this. It's not expensive. If you know how to use a screwdriver, you'll be able to fix this thing. So let's dive in and get this thing fixed. All right, so before we even get started, quick tool lineup. We got a drill with a Phillips bit. I've got a flathead screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver, 1/4 inch heat shrink. We're gonna need that. Something sharp. I got just a little buck knife, comes to a nice point. We'll use that later. And that's just to disconnect the battery. Before we do anything with the trolling motor itself, make sure you disconnect power to it. My trolling motor is hardwired into the boat. I don't have a plug for it. I don't trust plugs, so I hardwire my trolling motors in. So instead, I'm going to go into my batteries here underneath my rod locker compartment. We're going to disconnect the battery, make sure the circuit is dead, and then we can tear into this thing and not worry about getting zapped. These things are very, very susceptible to having issues with arcs and sparks and bad things like that. You can easily destroy a $2,000+ trolling motor just by having some wires touch that shouldn't touch. So make sure you kill the power completely before you do anything to your trolling motor. It's going to save you a lot of headaches. Okay, with the power disconnected, first thing we're gonna do is pull off the side plates. One on this side and one on that side. Phillips head screwdriver or your drill with the Phillips attachment. All right, so side plates are off. We've got everything we need exposed up there for the time being. The next thing is going to be getting into the head of the trolling motor and actually removing this so we can slide the shaft out of that housing, pop that box out, put the new one on, and we're good to go. This is probably the most complicated part of the whole process. That being said, it's still really, really easy. So I'm gonna show you real quick, kind of walk you through how to get in here, disconnect everything so we can take the shaft off. First thing, we're gonna take our ram mount off. Then there are 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, and 4 to separate the 2 halves of the head and to actually remove the entire head from the shaft. On the inside here, there is a little lock nut, and we got another Phillips head screw that runs through the shaft. So first thing we're gonna do, take that off, pop these 4 screws out, disconnect what's going on inside here, and then we'll be able to remove the whole thing, slide the shaft out. All right, so screws are out. The top of our trolling motor can come off. I'm actually gonna leave this attached here. This is our compass for the GPS for your autopilot and your spot lock function. We're gonna leave that attached. But inside here, we've got a few wires we're gonna play with. So this one here with the silver connectors, that is your transducer. We're gonna disconnect this, pop it off, super easy. The next 2 we're gonna deal with are the red and black wires with these blue insulating sleeves on them. We're gonna slide that sleeve down the wire, and you can see here we just have like a little quick connector, and that's on both of these wires. So we're gonna slide that insulator out, disconnect that, do that on both wires, and then I'll show you the tricky part of disconnecting the trolling motor head here. So I'm gonna set you guys down, maybe, there we go, got it. All right, so the last wire we have here is this brown wire. Goes to a 3 amp fuse. This is a good time to check that fuse, make sure it's good. I know this one's good. And how do you disconnect this? So if you look at this, there is actually a quick connect underneath this shrink tubing here, and there's a quick connect underneath it here, ahead and behind this inline fuse. We're gonna disconnect it right here as close to the shaft as we can get. Otherwise, you gotta deal with pulling this through the head housing here and then through our gearbox as well. So we're gonna disconnect it right here. And this is where you're gonna need something sharp. If you have an X-Acto knife that comes to a sharp point, this is a great time to use it. You're going to be able to slide this up underneath the shrink tubing, slit this open without damaging the wires, exposing that disconnect, or quick connect rather, and we'll be able to slide that off, and then all of a sudden, bam, we're free. We're going to be able to take this thing off, no problem. So I'm going to get my knife out, we're going to cut that quick, and then we're going to slide this thing off. All right, so I got my shrink tubing cut off. I actually I kind of ringed this, so I've actually got shrink tubing on each side of the connections there. There we go, we're disconnected. So now everything we have here actually runs through the shaft of the trolling motor, so everything's disconnected. Now we can actually take off the bottom part of this head housing here, and then we'll be able to slide everything off. All right, so we've got our depth setting collar removed. We also have our lift assist removed. You might have noticed this came off real quick and easy. That's because this is actually broken. I snapped the collar a few years ago, actually right after I got this thing, so my lift assist doesn't work, but it does not impact the way the trolling motor functions. So there are more videos out there explaining how to take that off with the spring and everything, but mine came right off because it's broken. And now you can see there is nothing on the shaft of the trolling motor. We've got our wires sticking out of the end here. So now we are ready to pull the shaft out of the housing and take this thing apart. To get our shaft out, we're actually going to hit the lever back here as if we are going to deploy the motor, slide it forward, and then there it goes. So I'm in the garage. I got to be kind of careful here that I don't hit anything. And there we go. Now we can just slide that thing out. We'll be able to pop the housing off, and I'll show you how to take that off, how to put it back in, and reassemble. Now we just have to take out our housing, and the reason we took the side plates off is because we actually need to get to this pin here that is holding the housing in place. So to get that thing off, you actually need to depress our release button there, and you can see how now we have clearance around the shaft. There is a little pressed on washer. I don't know the actual technical term for that, but it's basically a little pressure fit washer, kind of a one-way deal. We're gonna slide that thing off. It's gonna take some pressure to get that thing off. It's pretty on there. They're not really made to be taken off and put back on. So that being said, if you pry that thing off, we're gonna use our flathead screwdriver, get in there, pry this thing off. Once you get them started, they come out pretty easily, but we're gonna pry that off. And if you find that when you're putting this thing back together and that thing is not real snug, just go get a new one. They have them at most hardware stores. They're super cheap. Replace that thing so that way you don't have to worry about this pin sliding out. So let's go ahead, pop that pin, and we will move on to the next step. All right, so we got our pin out. This shaft is ready to be pulled out so we can actually remove the housing. But before we do that, obviously there's a wire going to that. We got electrical connections to deal with here. So we're gonna pop off this piece here, exposing the guts. So all you have to do is follow that wire in here. We got two connections. We got a positive and a negative. They are on quick connectors, so we can just pop those off. And there we go, we're disconnected. Now we have this other little plastic piece here that fits in the housing. We're gonna kind of twist and move this around until we get it to pop out. We'll pop it off of the wire here. Then we can slide our housing off. We'll be able to slide the new one in, and we're ready to rock. So let's dig in here. We'll pop that out, and we'll put the new one on. So with the wires loose, we can actually pull out this shaft here that's holding this all together. It's gonna be a little tricky doing this one-handed. Probably could switch over to a chest cam, I suppose, but we're gonna pull this out. There we go. That is out. And this is actually a good time if you want to throw a little grease on that. Not a bad idea. And there we go. Our housing is free. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, depending on where you get your replacement parts from, there are these plastic bushings that sit here on the sides of where that shaft runs through and actually attaches it to the base of the trolling motor. Save those. You may not get new ones with your new unit here, and that's pretty much it. Then it's just plug and play at that point, and we're good to go. Basically, just reverse the process, and we're all set. All right, so quick tip when we're putting this little keeper washer back on the shaft here, use a 10mm deep socket. We're gonna take that, it's gonna fit over the shaft there. We're gonna give it a hard smack, and while holding onto the other side there, and that is gonna make pushing this thing back on and getting it in place a lot easier instead of doing it by hand or trying to move it in with a pair of pliers or something. This way you don't mess up or bend this washer. You're gonna get it in place in usually one shot. We got both of our little set washer deals locked back in place. Our housing is right where we need it. So now, again, going in reverse, we're gonna put everything back together. We're going to reconnect our quick connect wires here, kind of in our little motherboard, if you will. And then we're gonna reshaft the housing and put the head back together and give this thing a whirl, make sure it works. I apologize for the lighting in here, it's not the best, but now we're just gonna put everything back on the way that we took it off. Really, really simple. Also, forgot to mention before, but a pair of hemostats, especially a long pair of hemostats, makes this part a lot easier, kind of fishing these wires back through. There's all kinds of little grooves and stuff in there to get caught in, which is kind of annoying. All right. You're probably wondering, why are you even putting this back on if it's broken? You actually need this piece for this trolling motor to function properly. The trolling motor actually kind of locks in to this piece right here. That actually is very important. So that's why that piece is going back on, followed by our depth collar. Put that back on. Obviously don't need that tightened, but we'll just slide it back on. And our ram mount. There we go. All right, now we're ready to put the head back on our trolling motor. Okay, so we'll slide our wires back through. Bam, we are reconnected. So next, we're gonna take our 1/4 inch shrink tubing. We're gonna cut off a little section of it, probably about, I don't know, just over an inch or so. We're gonna slide this over our brown wire that we had to cut the shrink tubing off previously. We're going to reconnect it, unwind it first, but then we are going to reconnect it just like that. We'll slide our shrink tubing down over the connection, make this thing waterproof, and obviously protect it from potentially arcing on other things. Here we go. And those little bit of tag ends that I left on there from the previous shrink tubing actually work really well for getting this stuff to really seal down. That way you're not sealing it all the way down to the wire, you're sealing it onto that old shrink tubing. So if your diameter is not perfect, maybe it's just a little too big, that's gonna give you a little bit of play in your shrink with your new shrink tubing and making sure that this thing actually shrinks down the way it needs to. All right, we are shrunk, we didn't burn through. That is good to go. So now you just connect the dots, black to black, red to red. Make sure that you slide this little blue insulating cover all the way down, completely covering those connectors. If these things touch, that is not good. So there we go, red to red. Slide our little insulator over once again. And then the last thing is our transducer, which I don't really need to reconnect because I don't have a graph in the front of my boat, but we're gonna do it anyway. I'd rather have it connected and not have loose wires. Bam, there we go. So the next thing we're gonna do is reconnect the head to the shaft. This part is a little bit tricky. The biggest thing is making sure that this little lock nut that's in the back here does not fall out, and make sure that you feed your screw through here straight. And sometimes this takes a little bit of playing around because you have to A, get it through here, B, get it into the hole in the shaft, C, get it through those wires without damaging them, and then make it out the other side. So this can be a little bit tricky, but once you get it in, you're good to go. We can slap the rest of this thing together. Alrighty, so with the power reconnected, We're live. Let's go ahead and drop this thing down very carefully because it is still on the trailer. There we go. Now we're in. Good to go. Make sure that we've got power to the propeller. Perfect. Awesome. Well, there we go, guys. Trolling motor is ready to rock. All right, guys, there you have it. Hopefully you guys made it to this point. I know this is a long, kind of tedious video, but to those of you who made it through to the end, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, please leave comments below. I will do the best I can to answer them. I do want to make it very clear that I am not a mechanic. I am not a certified mechanic for Minn Kota or anything like that. I just happen to work on a lot of my own stuff, and most of the time it works just fine. So hopefully this was helpful. I will have a link in the description to the steering box where I found it. I think I paid like 150 bucks and change or something like that for it, which is very cheap considering it would probably be a several $100 fix if you take it to a dealer to have them rebuild it or replacing your trolling motor. So hopefully this was useful. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and we will see you on the next one.